and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
There was a lot to play for in the Manchester derby as Ralf Rangnick's United visited Pep Guardiola's City. City needed a win to reopen a 6-point lead ahead of Liverpool, whilst United needed it to keep a reasonable position for Champions League qualification. And in the end, City came out on top, 4-1, thanks to doubles from De Bruyne and Mahrez after Sancho's leveller. The XG showed the gulf in class, 2.74 to 0.36. But what tactics were on display? Let's take a look.
And just before then, I'm delighted to be working with my fantasy football app of choice yet again, Spitch. Spitch is a subset of OneFootball, and here's personally what I love about it. Firstly, the prizes are weekly, so even if you forget to update your team one week, the following week is a fresh slate, so it's an even playing field, and you don't have to wait for the end of the season for prizes. It's also not just about goals and assists to score points, like other fantasy football apps. Instead, it rewards blocks, tackles, passes and more, so your Contes and Rodris are actually a viable option. In my team this week, Rudiger and Chalobah came up big for me. And you can also play on free pitches or paid for pitches, and either way you can still win cash prizes. So download Spitch for absolutely free through the link in the description below to give it a go, and help to support the channel. And make sure you join the FMS EPL community, which is also linked below, and I'll shout out the best performers in future videos. Spitch is currently UK and Ireland only, 18 years old and up, and you need ID verification to register through the link in the description below.
Let's start with City on the ball. Despite ending with a passes per defensive action of over 20, early in the match United did look to press. Pogba could initially cut off Rodri, the deepest midfielder, before moving forward to cut off the second centre-back. And initially, City were using a traditional back four, with both fullbacks wide, so the 2 versus 2 meant that the City centre-backs were under pressure. And Sancho in particular would look to press from out to in to cut off the easy outlet path into the fullback. This did force City to give up possession at times, but Pep had different solutions to this. The most simple was playing back to Ederson, who could then find the fullback, as United's own fullbacks were tied up by the wingers. It should be noted that part of the reason City could break the press is that by using a 4-4-2, United were always a minimum of one man down in the midfield. So when the forwards tried to cut off Rodri, to even up the midfield that way, Laporte and Stones now had time to find progressive passes to connect with the fullbacks or the forwards, which they were fairly good at. But when the United forwards did press the centre-backs, now Rodri could be found. But City were particularly good at using the left-hand side and the centre simultaneously. Having initially been starting wider, now City had figured out United's defensive shape, so Walker inverted to play as the third centre-back, so now City always had a 3 versus 2. Although when United did press, they still tried to force the ball to the wider centre-backs to prevent the easy pass into Rodri. While Rodri stayed deep, Bernardo could come deep as the auxiliary man to receive and progress the ball. But for the most part, he and De Bruyne stayed higher up in the wide spaces when possible. With United only having a double pivot, if they tried to track closely, this could leave a chasm in the midfield that Foden could drop into to turn and receive and move City higher. But the left-hand side trio of Bernardo, Grealish and Cancelo was the difference maker. At times when Foden dropped, Lindelof stuck tight to make it difficult for him to receive. But if Foden stayed higher, Grealish is comfortable playing as a midfielder, so Bernardo could occupy McTominay, Cancelo, Wan-Bissaka, meaning that Grealish could now drop deep and receive, and drive forward, leading to dangerous situations. But generally, initially, Elanga started off quite narrow defensively, partly covering Bernardo with his cover shadow to make up for the midfield inferiority. In these scenarios, Cancelo would start deep, and when he received, he would draw Elanga, and if Grealish was still high up trying to tie up Wan-Bissaka, Bernardo looked to move across to receive in this space, to potentially cause a 2 versus 1 against Wan-Bissaka. McTominay could come across to cover, but this would potentially create a new passing lane through the centre. We see some of this in the first goal. Pogba and Fernandes are a front two looking to cover Rodri and press the centre-backs at the same time. De Bruyne and Bernardo are wide in the half spaces, so Foden has dropped between them into the midfield. And we see that Elanga starts off much more central, helping to cover Bernardo. But when Cancelo receives out wide, Elanga has to move out, and Bernardo has now moved into the space to receive, as Grealish occupied Wan-Bissaka. McTominay does come across to cover, but at this stage, individual quality takes over as City maneuver the defence to create a goal. The left-hand side trio also use the half space incredibly effectively. The fact that all three are comfortable in all three of these positions meant that constant rotation made them difficult to track. But when Elanga was drawn out and the winger drew in Wan-Bissaka, this left the third man able to make the run through the half space for a potential crossing opportunity, or to drag out Lindelof out of position if he looked to cover. But deeper in the build-up, City had alternative ways of manipulating United's shape. When behind, United tried to press a lot more, with the front two on the centre-backs, so Bernardo would drop deep to be a second pivot alongside Rodri to give them two options. If Fred and McTominay backed this up, it then left them with massive problems, as now De Bruyne, Foden, and Grealish, if Cancelo had moved high, had space to receive potentially between the lines, if the centre-backs could find them higher up the pitch, or even in the build-up. Lastly, City manipulated United's wingers well. Down the right-hand side, when Sancho was drawn to Walker at right centre-back, De Bruyne moved wide right to receive in acres of space to cause damage. Down the left, when Elanga was caught narrow, Bernardo in this position meant that Walker could often switch it out to Grealish for a dangerous 1 versus 1 situation, which saw Grealish looking good in this game. Overall, this was a dominant win for City, particularly in the second half, keeping them in control of the title race. Rangnick on the other hand will be concerned by the weak showing against a quality side, particularly given United's run-in. But my two questions for you: will United finish in the top 4, and will City win the league? For the tactical score, Rangnick made some odd decisions, using two midfielders against a side that likes to dominate the midfield. But Rangnick did not use his midfield forwards to drop into the midfield when they were in possession in order to help to hold onto the ball. This means he earns a 3. Pep on the other hand was near flawless, particularly in the second half. The only thing being that City did look vulnerable at times on the break, so he earns a 9.
Oh, how tactic, how masterclass.
But what are your ratings?
And if you enjoyed this video, you may also enjoy the FMS Patreon. On Patreon, you'll get early access to videos, exclusive videos, as well as the ability to vote on various polls and so much more. It's a great way to support the channel, and it is now cheaper than ever. All you have to do is head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple, or press the card in the top right or the end card at the end of this video.
A special thanks to my newest patrons including Edwin, Ref, Kobe Johnson, and Ben 2001.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.